What were the messages that you were trying to get to the public, or what were the messages you were trying to help Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg get to the public about itself at that time that you thought were noble?
The power of connectivity to change lives and move societies forward, that is absolutely true. It's still true. People can absolutely detest, any number of these companies. Most of us still carry a smartphone. Most of us have social media. These are things which have become really valuable in our lives. And those are all real things. They're things which, can mean a huge difference in the quality of life for communities and families and, all sorts of people. In fact, my own journey, going from where I started to, being able to do all the things I'm, doing, in my life. In fact, I think technology was a big part of that. I remember I was at home. My parents were of no help guiding me in my career, obviously. Like when I was a teenager and I was trying to figure out, like, how do I apply to university? It's like my parents didn't go to university. So it was literally me staying up like, typing away on my dad's old computer, literally flinging out queries into the early internet, trying to figure out like what would you need to do all these things? Yeah. Like what is an internship? Stuff like that. Where would you find that information in those days?
Yeah.
What, I was going to go down to the library and ask the librarian? Like, so that's the value, right? And there were things when I was at the company which really would fill you with pride. I remember going, to rural India with Zuckerberg. I traveled on the trip. It's in the book, I think. And you would meet people whose lives have been completely changed by having access to the internet. I remember we were at this village in the middle of nowhere in India, and it had just got access to like an internet cafe. And this old man had come into the cafe to get help from one of the like kids who like had learned to use the internet because he wanted to track down his friend who he hadn't seen in like years. And he was like, can you help me like research things? Because he was my best friend and I haven't seen him in like 20 years. And like, he's somewhere out there and I don't know where he is. And like, this kid found him in like 5 minutes. And this guy started crying. And it was like, that is the sort of
that's the magical side of it.
Deeply tangible impact, right?
Yeah.
But this is the thing. This is the tremendous duality of the moment, that you can have things like that which are real and you can acknowledge those things. But like, there's all sorts of other things happening too.
So what was the first thing that sort of triggered your spidey sense? Well, what was the first thing that made you question the noble mission you were on?
It was the refugee crisis.
Which one?
Yeah, which one? So 2015, when the war in Syria was
so the Syrian migration movement, people were fleeing into Europe,
that's
going
right,
through Germany,
so
etc.
you suddenly had this like rapid acceleration in the number of people being displaced, and you had tens of millions of people on the move. So at the time there were about 65 million refugees in the world, and it was the greatest number in history, biggest humanitarian disaster of all time. And my dad was really sick that year. So he had lung cancer. It was the last year of his life. We knew that he only had a few months left. He had started smoking when he was about 12 years old as a child refugee. That was the really deeply unhealthy life he had, living in the refugee camp. And anyway, it finally caught up with him. He was in his late 70s. So, I had really come to understand his story in that last year of his life because he never talked about it. And I had a very bad relationship with my dad. He'd had this terrible childhood. He was like very abusive. He was psychologically very scarred from his childhood. I
can only imagine, yeah.
Yeah, and so I made peace with him in the last year of his life. And so I was already like bubbling with a bunch of feelings.
Yeah.
And then it was September 2015, and this photo went all over the world, and you probably would recognize it if you saw it. It was this photo of this 3-year-old boy, Alan Kurdi, who was a Syrian refugee.
I think so. Is it the one, if I'm not mistaken, is in the back of the ambulance maybe? Or is it like...
That was a different one.
Oh, that's a different one. Okay.
It was the little boy who drowned.
Oh, no. Okay, no. Yeah.
Yes. And there's a famous photo of the body on the shores of this island. It looks like he's sleeping. And, he drowned along with his 5-year-old brother and his mother trying to cross the Mediterranean to get away. And I remember that moment because all the world leaders were so shocked because publics were so outraged and people were so upset. I remember, you had prime ministers going on TV saying, right, that's it. We're gonna stop this thing now. We're gonna intervene. This is where we draw the line. Of course, 10 years later, there's now 135 million refugees in the world, which is more than 2 world wars combined. It hasn't gotten any better. It's getting worse by the day. But at that time, that was the first moment where I thought, look at the gulf between the ambitions of the world's richest people with all their vast technology, saying that we're going to lift humanity up. And there is humanity right there, the biggest humanitarian catastrophe of our time. And you can say, well, why should it be up to the CEO of one of these tech companies to go and solve that problem? Well, maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe they have some part to play in it, but that's not the point. The point is, if you have a thesis that your technology is now going to be this thing which automatically leads us to this better future, and the future is playing out right there, and you are not doing anything to even investigate how you might shape that, then your thesis starts to ring a little hollow. And I remember sitting at my desk in Facebook in this palatial headquarters, on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, just thinking, God, I'm at the edge of the world in air-conditioned luxury. And that is the animating reality of people all over the world, and people who are just like my dad when he was a kid. That's my dad's story playing out right there. Anyway, my dad passed away, just a little bit more than a month after that photo came out. And, I went back to England and, I had a bunch of time, to think over the next few weeks. And I decided that's it. I've got to find a different path through this industry. And that really was something which started, a bunch of these gears spinning. I still was in tech for a bunch more time. And it was something that I began to take more and more of a position that I had to be involved directly in shaping the causes and the movements and the issues that were playing out in very different parts of the world.
So I understand that on an altruistic level, as it pertains to the world, but I'm trying to understand where your disillusionment began with regards to Facebook, and then we'll move into the broader tech world itself, because I'm hearing what you're saying. You were taken aback by a story that was affecting the world, and on your side, it was affecting you personally as well, because it it had echoes of a past that had shaped you in many ways. But I don't understand how this then casts Facebook in a bad light. This is just a social media company. What is it that Facebook did? What is it that Mark Zuckerberg said or did that made you go, Facebook is part of the actual problem, that we're not the cause of everything in the world, but Facebook is contributing to these problems?
Facebook has become a central piece of the machinery for how you convince the world of things. It's the battleground of ideas played out across Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook. Connects billions of people. It connected the world. And all of the central problems of our time are playing out in those communities. And so Facebook absolutely has a role in how it prioritizes and it thinks about the architectures that might dramatically shape and shift how the entire world acts on any number of problems. And of course, the company absolutely would point to all the things that it thought might be positive stories for the company and how it did those things. You'd look at, here's all the money that's raised on charity on Facebook. True thing. Very, very powerful for lots of organizations to raise money on Facebook. But at the same time, there'd be other things where, the company would have a sort of, we've got enough on our plate. That's not really a thing for us right now. And so actually, I'm not saying that suddenly Zuckerberg had to make the refugee crisis his number one thing. I absolutely think if you have a thesis about you're connecting the world and you're building this motor of society and you happen to be one of the world's richest people, you probably should make it a part of your responsibility. But there's any number of other issues which absolutely are things that where the company dropped the ball on. Why is it our societies are so deeply divided and angry now in a world awash with disinformation and hate? That is something which absolutely was in the company's power, and it touches the lives of refugees and non-refugees alike. It shapes all of our lives. It shapes the entire digital ecosystem, and the company did not meet its obligations there.